My name's David Winecove, and I'm the chair of the British Society for Research on Aging. We're a charity run mostly by volunteers, and we represent scientists in the UK studying the biology of aging at all levels, from the molecular right up to human physiology. Part of our remit is to get scientists talking to each other and support their research, at least in a small way. But another of our key aims is to communicate outside our field, and particularly to the general public. Aging has become big news in recent years, both because we have an aging society, which affects the economy and how things work around us, but also because many people have become very interested in how to stay healthy. I suppose the older you get, the more it interests you. There's been a lot of content generated recently by journalists and social media influencers, but rarely do people get a chance to talk to the scientists who do the research. We want the voice of the scientists to be heard and to give people the chance to question them. We've always had a public session, our annual conference, but we've decided to embark on a series of online lectures featuring some of the best scientists in the country and the world to engage a much bigger audience. And I'm pleased so many people are here this evening. And I know that you've coming from all over the UK and the rest of the world and of all ages. So today we begin this series with Professor Janet Lord, or should I say Emeritus Professor Janet Lord. It's my pleasure to introduce Janet. She has an amazing track record of research at the University of Birmingham and is a winner of the Lord Cohen Medal, our society's highest honour. Janet is also such a supportive person to those around her and to us at the BSRA. At the University of Birmingham, for many years, she led a group of the general public called the Birmingham 1000 Elders, of whom many are represented in the audience this evening. I'm very much looking forward to her talk. Janet will speak for about 35 to 40 minutes, and then there will be time to ask her questions, anything you like. You can either type your question in the Q&A box below, or raise your hand at the end of the talk, and we can invite you to ask your question to Janet directly. So, over to you, Janet.
Thank you, David, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak about my research. As your audience will know, I'm going to focus on the immune system because I'm actually a professor of immunology. And hopefully by the end of the talk, you'll be persuaded that your immune system does age, but luckily also that you can do something about it. So let's try and kick off. So I'll just get the slides loaded up and then we can start. Laser pointer. There we go. Okay, so here's what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to, first of all, give you some of the evidence that your immune system does actually age, and by that I mean it doesn't function as well. I'm going to go through some of the evidence that we got of why that happens. Why does your immune system not function as well as you get older? And I'm going to focus on the two different arms of the immune system, one called the innate immune system and one called the adaptive immune system, and give you some examples of each. And I'm going to work into those examples, how to actually try to overcome this age-related decline, thinking about lifestyle, thinking about nutrition and physical activity, but also some drugs that are already in common use that actually can help your immune system. So that's what I'm going to be thinking about today. So first of all, if I'm going to persuade you that the immune system ages, we've got to think about what your immune system actually does. And most of you will be thinking, well, it helps us to fight infections. And yes, it does. It's a key role is to be able to detect when you've got an infection in the body, whether it's a virus or a bacteria, and then to kill it once it knows it's there. So that's a key thing. But your immune system also has memory. So the first time you see an infection, your immune system reacts to it. But then luckily it actually remembers and it develops an immune response so that when you see it again, that infection again, it fights the infection much more efficiently and much quicker than it did the first time. And that's the basis of vaccinations. When you have a vaccination, you are vaccinated with a small amount of the pathogen. It's usually, for example, your flu jab. It's just you don't put the whole flu virus in. You just put a little bit of the surface of the virus, and that's enough. And your immune system then develops memory to that, so that if you get flu later in the year, you can fight it really efficiently. Your immune system, point three on the slide here, also has to be able to not attack yourself. So your immune system generally will just fight foreign things like bacteria and viruses and won't attack yourself. So you don't want what we call autoimmunity. Lastly, and many of you may not know this, but your immune system also can detect and kill cancer cells in their early stages. It also can detect and kill very old cells in the body. They're called senescent cells, and I'm going to tell you a bit more about those in a moment, and cells that are damaged. So it really has a whole range of things. So what's the evidence that these functions decline as we age? Here we go. Okay, let's look at infections first. So this is data on respiratory infections, so mainly flu. It's complex, but I'm going to walk you through it. So what we've got here, these blue bars are every time there's a flu epidemic. On the axis here, this is the number of people who go to their GPs with the infection. And we've got different ages. So here we've got 45 to 64-year-olds. And this green line is people going to see their GPs with an infection. And you can see it peaks every time there's an epidemic. And if you're 45 to 64 years old, then the incidence is about 900 per 100,000. And this blue line down here, that's people who become sick enough to enter hospital. And there's a yellow line, which is chances of dying from that infection. And in this group, you're really not going to be sick enough to go to hospital if you've got flu, and you're certainly not going to pass away. When you get to 65 to 74 years old, then the picture changes. So we've got more people being sick enough to go to their GP, so the incidence is now 1,200 per 100,000. But there's still a fairly low chance, this blue line, that you'll be sick enough to go to hospital. And again, in that age group, you're unlikely to die if you have the flu. When we get to over 75 years old, then we see the worst picture. The green line going initially to their GP, this is now up at 1,400 per 100,000. So we've got more people sick enough and getting the infection. And now there's about a 1 in 3 chance you're sick enough if you're in that age group to end in hospital, and you might pass away from the flu. So really this is telling you that as you get older, you're more susceptible to the infections and you're sicker. Here's an example that's a little bit closer in your memories for all of you, COVID-19. We saw the same picture there. And here, actually, the people getting the infections, that was the same no matter what age you were. But the problem was that it was the older individuals that were becoming sick enough to end up in hospital and to pass away. So this is mortality from COVID-19. From blue is males and green is females. And here are different ages here. And in fact, the older you were, the increased risk there was that you would die as a result of having COVID-19. And in fact, over 90% of the deaths from COVID were in the over 70-year-olds. So really, infections are an issue, and you can see that your immune system really isn't detecting and killing these infections as well as you get older. What about that second element then, immune memory? I told you this is where your immune system reacts better the second time you see an infection, and that's how vaccines work. So here's some data for tetanus, but it's pretty well the same for any vaccination. So what an vaccination does is it causes your immune system to make molecules called antibodies. Those antibodies can stick to the infection, whether it's a virus or a bacteria, and stop it doing the damage that it causes. So here, when we look at a vaccination, we see how many antibodies your body makes when you're vaccinated. And what we've got along here is the age of the person who gets vaccinated. So in this first left-hand figure, so basically this red line, if you make an amount of antibody above that line, then you will be fully protected from that infection. And you can see that if you're 70 and younger, the chances are that you will be protected. But if you're 70 and older, you're not going to make enough antibody to be protected against tetanus. How long that protection lasts also declines with age. So in the case of tetanus, you may be familiar that generally you're supposed to get a booster every 10 years. But look at these data here. You can see that if you're 50 and younger, you'll still have some antibody left in your system. But 50 and older, and the chances are you won't have enough antibody to be protected. And in fact, in Austria, where these data were generated, they now recommend boosters for tetanus every 5 years. But the rest of us, unfortunately, are still stuck with 10 years. So the second element of your immune system, this immune memory, doesn't last and is not as effective as you get older. Okay. What about this thing that your immune system shouldn't attack yourself? Well, that's the basis of autoimmune diseases. In those diseases, your immune system actually makes antibodies to your own tissues. So if it's, for example, here, rheumatoid arthritis, you make antibodies to the joints in your hands, your knees, your shoulders, any joint in the body, you make antibodies. And so you get swelling and pain. And that's an age-related disease. The older you are, the higher the chances that you will develop rheumatoid arthritis. And in the figure on the right here, what we've done is we've looked for these autoimmune antibodies in young and old people. And these older people here, over 65-year-olds, didn't have rheumatoid arthritis, but they did have more autoantibodies compared to a young person. So generally, as you get older, you start to make antibodies to your own tissues. And in some adults, they will develop diseases like rheumatoid arthritis. So that third element of your immune system also doesn't function as well. What about the fact that your immune system also detects cancer early on? Well, many of you may know that most cancers are age-related. So the older you are, the increased chance that you will develop a cancer. And these are data from Cancer Research UK, which shows that for males and females, for a whole range of cancers, the risk is higher as you get older. So your immune system also isn't detecting and killing cancer cells as well as it does when you're younger. And the last little bit of the cell side of work is those senescent cells. So these are cells in the body, and they're basically cells that have been damaged in some way. It could be through chemicals in the body. It could be through perhaps UV irradiation from sunlight. You've spent too long out in the sun. But it could also be that a cell has just become older in the body. It's copied itself many, many times, and it's just at the end of its natural lifespan. And what happens to these cells is they enter this stage called cell senescence. And what you've got here in this figure is skin cells. And what we've done here is we've looked for proteins that are found in senescent cells so that we can find how many senescent cells there are in, and this example is skin. So we've got young skin, old, middle-aged skin, and old skin. And the brown colouring is a senescent cell at the top here, and again it's brown here on the bottom. And you can see on the right figures here that basically you find very few senescent cells in a young person, but as you get older, you get more of these senescent cells. And we now know that these senescent cells are some of the major causes probably of aging in the body. They release chemicals that destroy the tissue around them. They cause other healthy cells to become senescent. But importantly, they increase inflammation in the body. So they release proteins that increase inflammation, which brings me to the last little piece of aging biology, as it were. So as you get older, this amount of inflammation in your body increases, and it's called inflammaging. So here's a study that we did quite a few years ago now, back in 2012. And how you measure inflammation is you look for certain chemicals in the body. So this one is called interleukin 6. This one is called TNF. This one here is called CRP. And what we did was we measured the amount of these inflammatory proteins in people at baseline. So here they were in their 70s, and then we followed them up 10 years later, and they were in their 80s. And we found that the amount of these inflammatory chemicals was about 2 to 3-fold higher. So they'd increase this inflammation. And again, this is a diagram here, just an infographic there showing you what happens. Now, normally this inflammation can be controlled in the body by, again, immune chemicals. And one of them here is this one called interleukin 10. It's released by your immune cells and it controls that inflammation. It keeps it down. But in our study, we found that as we get older, we make less of this anti-inflammatory protein. So you're less able to control that inflammation. And we now know that is that inflammation that's really one of the causes of aging and age-related diseases. So the higher this inflammation, the higher the risk of a whole range of diseases like cardiovascular disease, cancer, and dementia. So we're beginning to understand that controlling this inflammation is really important if you're going to have a healthy older age. So by now, I hope that I've persuaded you that your immune system doesn't work as well, and I've given you some clues as to some of the reasons why this inflammation. So now I have to tell you a little bit of some basic immunology, and I will try to keep it less scary than it can be. So first off, the immune cells, they're in your blood most of the time, and there are different types of ones. They're all made in your bone marrow from a cell called a stem cell. And this stem cell can divide and it can become different types of immune cells. And it has basically two career choices. So initially it can become either what we call a myeloid cell or it can become a lymphoid cell. And these myeloid cells, these make up that innate part of your immune system. And what we mean by that is that when you get an infection, these innate cells, there's lots of them, literally millions and millions of them in your blood, and they react really, really quickly. So when an infection comes in, they're there instantly, and they try to deal with the infection. Now, the lymphoid side, this is the one that gives you that memory. So they react better to the infection the second time you see it, and they're important in vaccine responses. But they're slow to respond, and I'll explain a little bit later why that is. But basically, these guys don't come into action or are not fully effective for about 1 to 2 weeks. So you need these guys, your first defense against infections early on in an infection. And there's lots of different types of them. And I'm not going to talk about all of them today, but you've got different types of immune cells because they're all specialized in killing different types of infections. So down here, there's one we call granulocytes, and in those we have things called eosinophils, and they're very good at killing parasites. We've got ones called neutrophils, which I'm going to talk about later, and they're specialized in killing bacteria like pneumonia. Now, on the right-hand side here, we've got another cell called a monocyte or a macrophage. It's got two different names, and that's really important. So these are some of your first defense against infections. They're in all tissues in the body. They're in your skin, they're in your muscle, they're in your liver, and they first detect the infection. And they basically then send out messages to the rest of the immune system to activate it. And that's these inflammatory proteins I told you about. So that inflammation that happens with aging, that's bad, but it's at a low level. But inflammation is also important for helping to activate your immune system. But that level of inflammation is much, much higher. It's about 100-fold that you see when you've not got an infection. And it's these monocytes that send those out to start with. And they also send out chemicals called chemokines that bring the immune cells into where the infection is. So that, for example, the neutrophils need to know that, for example, the bacteria is in your lungs and causing pneumonia. And it's those signals that the monocytes send out that tell the neutrophils where that infection is. So they're very important cells. Right. So that's a little bit of immunology. So what happens? I'm going to do that innate immune system first. So this is the one that doesn't give you memory. It's the one that reacts the same way to an infection every time, but you've got lots of them and they act really quickly. So the first one, and I love this name, they're called natural killer cells. And I think it sounds like something out of a Quentin Tarantino film. But their job is to kill virus-infected cells, cancer cells, and also those senescent cells, those old cells in the body. So they're really important. And I'm going to show you how they do this. So this is a picture down a microscope. So in this case, it's a cancer cell. So this is the cancer cell here. The blue is the center of the cell and the nucleus, and the green is the rest of the cell. And this is a natural killer cell here. It's much smaller. And how natural killer cells work is they basically recognize the cancer cell or the virus infected cell or the senescent cell, and they stick to it. And they release a chemical called perforin, which punches holes in the cell. And they then inject a killer chemical called granzyme, and that's what that bright green color is. So they inject that into the cell, and that kills the cell. And the natural killer then moves off and goes and kills another cell. So this is a young person's natural killer cell and the cancer cell, and you can see that it's there and it's ready to pump that chemical into the cell. Now this is an old person's natural killer cell, and there's the cancer cell, and I hope you can see that it hasn't put that killer chemical next to the cancer cell. So what happens with old age is your natural killers are just not as good at killing. They don't put that killer chemical into the cell. And here's it diagrammatically. There's a young person's natural killer cells and an old person's, and they're about 50% less effective as you're old. And this has real consequences. So here's some data from COVID, from a Chinese study. And what they did was they looked at healthy controls, those who got mild COVID, and those who got really severe COVID had ended up in hospital. And what they found was that those who got severe COVID had less of a type of cell called a CD8, but those natural killers, they had less of them. And when they looked to see how well they worked, they found that this is a marker of how well they worked here, that ones when they looked at a healthy control and somebody with COVID, their natural killers worked less well. So they had less of them and they worked less well. And when they looked at that granzyme, that killer chemical that the NK cells puts into the target cell, those who had COVID had less of that chemical. So it had real consequences. The less natural killers you had and the less effective they were, then you went down with serious COVID-19. But what about killing those senescent cells? So this is data that we haven't published yet. And what we did was we took some non-senescent cells, and here's a picture of them here. They're called fibroblasts, and here there's senescent ones. And we basically put them in with natural killer cells to see what happens. And first of all, we found that the natural killers don't kill the non-senescent cells. They only kill senescent cells. But when we looked at young persons' natural killers and an old person's, the old person's just wasn't as good at killing the senescent cells. So that may be one of the reasons why those senescent cells build up in your body and are causing so much damage with old age. The natural killer cells are just not killing them as easily. Okay, I'm going to move now on to bacterial infections. As I told you at the start, your chance of getting these infections increases with age. And here are two that you may have heard of, C. difficile and MRSA, and these are both hospital-acquired infections. And what we've got here are the total number of cases of these infections for this 3-year period in the UK. And you can see those are the under 64s, 65 to 75, and then over 75. And you can see that the older you were, particularly if you were over 75, then there's a much higher chance that you would go down with C. difficile or MRSA. So again, you're less able to deal with these infections as you get older. Now, why is that? So this is that cell I told you about, another member of the innate immune system called the neutrophil. And this is a really interesting cell. It's actually my favorite immune cell. And its job is to kill bacteria. And here's an immune cell there, a neutrophil, and that's a bacteria that it's trying to kill. And actually, these are the shortest lived cells in the body. They only live for 2 to 3 days. So every 2 to 3 days, you make more of these neutrophils. And you make literally 1 billion of them every day. So you've got lots of them in your body. You've actually got 100 billion of them at any time. And how they work is when there's an infection, those monocytes tell them where the infection is and they move towards the infection. That's called chemotaxis. When they get there, they literally eat the bacteria. They ingest the bacteria. That's called phagocytosis. And then they kill the bacteria by releasing chemicals onto the bacteria, or they can also kill them externally. They can put a net out and trap and kill the bacteria. And basically, if you compare a young and an old person's neutrophils, literally all of these functions are less good in an older person. But I'm going to focus on this first one to tell you why it happens, but also what we can do about it. So here's that chemotaxis. And what we've done here is we've taken some neutrophils from, in this case, it's a young person, and we've put them in a Petri dish. And at one side of the Petri dish is the neutrophil. So they start here. And then at the other side is one of these chemicals that attracts them. This is called interleukin 8, and that's at the top of the screen. And then we make a video of them, and you can see that the neutrophil has moved from there to there. So they're moving in a lovely straight line. So we can actually see how quickly a neutrophil moves and how well it moves in the right direction. So this is a young person's neutrophils. What about an old person's neutrophils? Well, look at this. I don't think you need to be a professor of immunology to see that there's a real problem here. So the chemokine, the thing that's attracting them, is up here at the top of the screen. This neutrophil's going to the right. They're wiggling around a lot. That one's even going completely backwards. So as you get older, your neutrophils are just not as good at moving in the right direction towards the bacteria. And if you think that most of these bacteria can make a copy of themselves and can grow in 20 minutes, so they can overwhelm the body really quickly if your neutrophils don't get there and kill them quickly. So this is a real issue. So why is it? Now I'm going to have to tell you some horrible chemistry now, I'm afraid. So this is a diagram of a neutrophil. And what happens is those chemicals that attract them, they literally bind to the front end of the neutrophil and give it a signal. They cause a signal to be generated inside the cell. And one of the early ones here, it's called PI3 kinase. This then generates, imagine it's like a series of dominoes falling over. So this activates this one, PIP, then AKT, down to this one. And this final one finally causes the cell to move. So we thought, well, I wonder what's happening with his age. I wonder if these signals are just not happening as well in the older person. Perhaps this PI3 kinase doesn't get activated. So this is what we did next. So this is a technique called Western blotting. And I don't want you to worry too much about, I'll tell you what it is. So what we do is we take a young person's neutrophils and we either give it nothing, so we take it fresh out of the blood, or we give it some of these chemokines here that cause it to move. And then we mush the cell up and we put it in a thing called a gel. And then we measure how much of that PI3 kinase there is and if it's active. And basically, if you look at this dark line, the more of that there is, the more of that PI3 kinase that there is. And you can see in the young person, there's fresh out of the blood, it's not active, there's nothing there. But when we give the chemoattractants, you see lots of it, so it gets activated. Now, when you look at the old person, we got a real surprise. So there's no increase in the amount of that PI3 kinase when we give that signal to move. But I hope what you might have spotted and what we just did not expect was when we took the neutrophils fresh out of the blood and didn't even give them any signal, they already had that PI3 kinase there. So it was as if that they were there all the time. So imagine that you're in your car, you turn the ignition on, the engine's going. If you try and turn the ignition on again, you get a horrible graunchy noise, but nothing's going to happen because it's already turned on. So we thought, well, perhaps if we're going to solve this problem, what we need to do is inhibit this, have less of this in the body so it's more like the young person. So that's what we did next. We took some neutrophils and using drugs, we gave the neutrophils their signals and we saw how well they moved. So this is with the signal alone and how well they moved. And then that PI3 kinase, there are 4 different types. They're called alpha, beta, gamma, and delta. And we found if we inhibited alpha or beta, it had no effect. The neutrophils didn't move any faster. But if we inhibit delta or gamma, then they moved much faster, just like a young person's. So yeah, we got a way that we could try to help the neutrophils move better. But there's no way we could use these chemicals in an older person, these drugs, because they're actually used to treat cancer. So they're really powerful drugs. So there's no way we could use them. We had to think of something else. So we went back to the drawing board and said, right, okay, so if we can't help this one, what about some of the other things in this chain of events, these domino of events? And we looked right at the bottom one here, this rack, because we knew, or I knew, that there was a drug that we already used an awful lot that could inhibit that protein. And many of you will have heard of this, statins. So statins, you will know, are given to try to lower cholesterol in the blood. So this is how cholesterol is made, and you don't need to know all the details, but there's cholesterol at the end. Statins come in here, they block the pathway, but in this pathway are chemicals that help to activate that last element in the neutrophil cascade. So we knew that statins could also inhibit that chemical. So what if we gave statins? Would that improve neutrophil movement? Sure enough, it did. So here's a young person's, the black bar is how well they moved without the statin, and then the clear bar is with the statin. Not much effect because the young people's neutrophils move great anyway. And there's the old person's, really rubbish movement. You treat them with a statin, brilliant, just like, in fact, slightly better than the young person. And this is concentration dependent. The more we give the neutrophils, the better they move. But this is in the test tube. The real test is, does it help an older person? So this was the proof of the pudding. So with my wonderful colleague Liz Sapey, who's a clinician, we did this study that we called Snoopy. And it was looking at patients with pneumonia. And we gave half of the patients statin, a high dose. This is the sort that level that you would be given if you have a stroke. Or we gave them placebo, so a pill with no statin in it, and we gave them for just 7 days when they came into the QE hospital in Birmingham. We looked at their neutrophils, and we also looked at their health generally and safety, etc. What happened? Well, the first thing was that when we looked at that movement of the neutrophils, the placebo did nothing. The neutrophils were really bad. But the patients who got the simvastatin for just 7 days, their neutrophils moved much better. But the most important thing was when we looked at mortality, so how many people survived their pneumonia. So this line here, the grey one, is the survival, and these are the people who got the placebo. So many less of them a year later were alive, and these are the people who got the statins. So we reduced death from pneumonia by 40%. So a massive effect. So statins really good for helping your neutrophils. Okay, so I'm going to move now on to the other side of things, the adaptive immune system. This is the one that makes memory. So what's going wrong there? Well, here's roughly how it works. So those lymphocytes I told you about, the important one for memory to start off is one called a T cell. And it's got its name because it's made in an organ called the thymus, which sits on top of your heart. And the thymus releases these T cells into your blood. And when the T cell meets the infection that it recognizes, and each T cell only recognizes one type of infection, so they're really specialized, but you don't have many of each one. So when they recognize the infection, they proliferate like crazy. So you literally get 1,000-fold increase in the cells. And then they do different things. So some of them will activate other immune cells. So they might activate the type of immune cell, it's called a B cell, that makes antibodies. So that's important for vaccination. It might activate another cell called a CD8 T cell, which also helps to kill viruses. But whatever they do, they control the infection. And when the infection's gone, most of these lymphocytes then die. But you are left with some of them, and they're your memories. So you get memory T cells and you get memory B cells to make antibody, so that the second time that you meet that infection, they respond much more quickly. So why doesn't this system function as you get older? Well, the first thing is that when those cells proliferate, they need energy to do that. This growth of the T cells to make thousands more of them takes energy. And one of the ways they do this is by a process called autophagy, which means basically eating yourself. So the T cell breaks down proteins and organelles in the cell and uses them as a source of energy. And it's really important. And what we found back in 2020, and this is work I do with Professor Katja-Simon at Oxford, we found when we compared young and old person's T cells that the old person's T cells weren't as good at doing this autophagy, which meant they couldn't proliferate as well, but also they couldn't do their job as well. So one of the things they do is they release a thing called interferon, which helps them to kill virus cells. And basically, the older person, the less autophagy they had, the less good that they were doing this. But one of the things we knew that was causing this was there's a chemical that you make in your body called spermidine. And the older you get, the less you make of it. But this spermidine can cause your autophagy to increase. Now, the lucky thing is that spermidine is also found in some foods, so particularly fermented beans. So if any of you have ever been to Japan, you might have had something called netto, which is fermented bean curd, and this is full of spermidine. So what we did was we thought, well, I wonder if this spermidine would help the T cells. And sure enough, when we gave old T cells and we gave them spermidine, their autophagy increased, their ability to make copies of themselves and proliferate increased, but importantly, they also were better at making interferon to help them kill virus-infected cells. So here was a nice nutritional component that can help your T cells. And Katja-Simon is now doing a vaccination study to see if spermidine, when given to older adults, will improve their vaccinations. The other thing that causes your adaptive immune system to not work as well is that organ in your body, the thymus, that makes new T cells, and you need new T cells to be able to deal with new infections like COVID or to deal with vaccinations. Unfortunately, as you get older, your thymus shrinks. It makes less T cells. So here's data for men and women showing the thymus declines. Now, why is that? Well, there's lots of reasons. One thing is that the thymus becomes full of fat as you get older, and that fat is actually inflammatory. So it causes inflammation in the thymus. And that means that your thymus is less able to make new T cells. So here's some images. So here we've done an MRI scan of an older person and a younger person. And here's their thymus. And basically, the more yellow the thymuses, the more fat there is inside. So here's a young person, you can see they've got very little yellow, it's mainly nice and orange. But here's the older persons. So we've got lots of fat in there. So we began to think, well, I wonder if there's anything we can do to try to stop this fat infiltration and try to keep your thymus nice and healthy. And because that there was, we knew that fat was one of the drivers, we thought, well, I wonder if physical activity is important. So we know the amount of physical activity you do as you get older declines, unfortunately. So here's the level for men on the left and women on the right. And in light blue, it's those doing very little activity. And dark blue here, those meeting the chief medical officer's recommendation. So you can see that by 65 and over, only about 5% of men are being active enough. And ladies were even worse, it's 1 to 2%. So could reducing this physical activity with age, could it be one of the causes of our immune system aging? And you're going to hear more about this in the next seminar from Professor Steve Harridge, but this is some work I did with him. And what we did was we looked at cyclists, 125 of them who'd been maintained their cycling right into old age. We had 84 men and 41 women, aged 55 to 79. And they had to be doing at least 100 kilometres in under 6.5 hours for men and 60 kilometres in 5.5 hours for women. And they had to have done that at least twice in the last 3 weeks. And we looked at everything in their body, including their immune system. And we looked at how compared them with age and sex matched controls. So young people and old people who didn't do this level of exercise. And what did we find? Well, I'm just going to tell you about the thymus. So this is a marker of how many new T cells have come out of your thymus. So it's how active your thymus is. And this is young people. This is old people who don't do active exercise like cycling. And this is the cyclists. So each dot is a person. And you can see when we compare the young person with the old people who don't cycle, that the old people who don't cycle have many less T cells coming out of their thymus. But look at the cyclists, they were as good as young people and many more than the less active elders. And why was this? Well, one thing we found out was that there's a chemical in your body called interleukin-7, and this is also important in keeping your thymus healthy. And when you age, you make less of it, but the cyclists made more of it. Also, I told you that inflammation was one of the things that causes your thymus to shrink. So here's one of those measures of inflammation. And here's the healthy young and the healthy old. And the older person not doing exercise has more inflammation. But the ones doing exercise, they didn't have that inflammaging that I told you about. So it looks like this being healthy and physically active really does help. But how much exercise do you need to do? I guess lots of you are saying, but I don't want to cycle 100 kilometres, Professor Lord. So we did another study with our 1,000 elders and we got 200 of them to wear a Fitbit and we did their step counts. And many of you may have heard about try to do 10,000 step counts. So we measured the amount of inflammation in our elders. Those who were doing less than 3,000 steps a day, they had that high level of inflammation, the inflammaging. The ones that were doing 5,000 to 7,000, actually, they'd reduced it by half. So even just doing 5,000 to 7,000 will keep you in a healthier state. But those that were doing 10,000, sure enough, they had the lowest levels of inflammation. Does that help you? You need a positive proof. And this is some data from a colleague of mine, Anna Whitaker. And what she did was she looked at how physically active older adults were and then their vaccination responses to pneumonia. And basically she looked at and found that the ones that were the more physically active the older adult were, the more of a chance there was that they were protected by their vaccination response. So it looks like being more physically active is also going to help your vaccination response, probably by helping your thymus to stay healthy. What else does exercise do? Well, one thing is you may not know that you've got your blood system that moves your blood around, but particularly those lymphocytes that are important for memory, they have a separate system called the lymphatic system. and it runs alongside the blood system. But your heart keeps your blood moving around, but for the lymph system, it relies on other things. So the arterial pressure in your blood system will help it, but also the more you move, if your muscles move, they help to pump the lymph around the body. So your lymphocytes can move around and try to find those infections. So that's one of the reasons why exercise is good. Another one is that your skeletal muscle actually produces chemicals that help to dampen down inflammation. So they produce chemicals called myokines, and they act on that immune cell called a macrophage and cause it to make some of that interleukin 10 I told you about earlier that dampens down inflammation. So your skeletal muscle, when it's active, really helps to educate your immune system to be less inflammatory. Okay, and that again is one of the ways that we can keep inflammation down. So, thank you for staying with me. In summary, your immune system functions less well with age, which increases your susceptibility to infections but also reduces vaccines. Staying physically active can counteract some of those effects, and some existing medications like statins but also nutrients can also help to counteract that effect. I'd like to thank all the great people who helped me do my research, and I'll now answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Janet. That was really, really great. And even for someone who has heard a lot about the immune system, it's always good to have it explained. Again, it's a complex thing, but you did it really brilliantly, very clearly. So if you have some questions, I see we've really got a hand up, but I'll just put to you the one that's in the Q&A first, Janet. From Patrick was, does dieting eat up, in inverted commas, cancer cells?
Sorry, does what eat?
Does dieting
Dieting.
eat up
Ah,
cancer cells?
that's a really good question. I haven't spoken at all. Some of you may have heard about intermittent fasting, things like the 5-2 diet, and they certainly help. We don't know yet whether it helps the immune cells to help kill cancer cells, but we do know that it helps to keep inflammation down. So the hint is there that it will help. We know that fasting will also increase that autophagy that I told you about. So that will help your T cells to work better. So although we don't definitely know, my prediction is that it should help your immune cells to work better. Sorry, that's the best answer I can give you at the time, Patrick.
Thank you. Liz, we've had a few hands up. Liz, can you invite James to talk? Yeah. James, over to you.
Oh, hi. Yeah, I was very interested about statins. You mentioned statins were beneficial, and
Yeah.
I've heard a lot of information about how statins are overprescribed and quite dangerous in effect. It has lots of other side effects. So I'm interested in what your
Yeah.
view of that is.
Really good question, James. So essentially, we know that the health benefits of statins, so it's primarily given to lower somebody's cholesterol and reduce the chance of heart disease. But we now know that statins do more than that. So that yes, there are other effects, but actually not what we call side effects. They're actually good effects. And one of the things they do is help the immune system, as I showed you. So they help neutrophils to function better, but they also help T cells to function better. So they seem to be good all around. And what you've probably heard is that they can cause myalgia, so muscle pains. But actually, there's now been some really big studies, one published in The Lancet with over 1 million people that they looked at, and they compared those who'd got side effects, particularly muscle pain, in those that were on statins compared to those that were on placebo, and there was no difference. And this is, James, what we called a nocebo effect. So a lot of people have heard about this and they think, oh, they put on a statin and the mind is a powerful thing. So they actually think, oh, I think my muscles are a bit more sore. But actually, like I said, there was actually no difference between the placebo group and the treated group. So there are some people who genuinely do have really bad muscle pains, but they're in a real minority. So overall, we're thinking that statins really are a good thing to take. And I'd be on them like a shot, James, but my cholesterol isn't high enough.
So I'm on sort of the borderline, and I've been advised to take them.
Yeah,
So maybe you think I should have a rethink about that.
I would. I'd have a rethink, James, because all of the evidence is showing that it's really good for your immune system.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
James.
James. Great question.
Yes, iPad 3, whoever you are, it's you're on to ask your question to Janet, please. Hello, we can't hear you. You're muted, iPad 3. Can you?
Is that better?
Yes.
That's it.
Yes.
Oh, nice to see you, Janet, anyway.
Hi.
Yes, good to see you. I was just going to say, what about the vegetarian diet? Do you have to eat meat to compensate, or do you think you could have a lean like chicken or fish and a
Yeah, good, really good question. So I didn't talk much about diet. I only mentioned spermidine. So the Mediterranean diet, again, it's very clear. It reduces inflammation, and part of this is particularly things like the fish in there, particularly fish oils. We know are anti-inflammatory. So some of you may take fish oils, and again, there's good evidence that they help to dampen that inflammation down. Again, by educating immune cells, making them less inflammatory. So yes, definitely good for reducing inflammation and getting your immune system to be less inflammatory. So yeah, definitely good is the Mediterranean diet. And also good, many of you may have heard, there's another one called the Mind diet, and it's a Mediterranean diet, but with extra ingredients to particularly protect your cognitive function in old age. And it differs from the classic Mediterranean diet by you have to include at least 4 days a week, a handful of berries, so like blueberries. You have to have some nuts every day, again, a handful of nuts. It can be any type of nut. And there's some beautiful studies where they've compared the Mediterranean diet with this Mind diet. And the people on the Mind diet retained their cognitive function for 7.5 years longer. So really, yeah, dampens that inflammation down and keeps your cognitive function for longer. So yes, go for it with the Mediterranean diet and on the berries and the nuts.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Pleasure. Lovely to hear from
I
you.
think we'll move to the questions on the Q&A to begin with, if that's okay, because we had quite a lot piling up here. So from John Hemming, when the thymus ends up with fat cells, is that from cells migrating to the thymus or cells in the thymus failing to differentiate, turning senescent and acting as adipocytes?
Yeah, excellent question. Bit of both. So you're definitely getting cells coming into the thymus that are normally precursors and will go on to become T cells, but instead they become adipocytes. And again, some of the ones already in there become adipocytes. So yeah, that's what happens. In animal species, it's not quite the same. It's just the thymus generally shrinks. But in humans, it's this fat infiltration that is a problem. And because, as you may well know, John, fat itself is inflammatory. It produces its own inflammatory chemicals. And so they then also stop new T cells being produced. So yeah, bad news all round for fat in the thymus.
Kay Swamina says, inspiring talk. Thanks, Professor. Wondering if people with cardiovascular disease because of physical inactivity age faster.
Oh, yes, I'm afraid they do. So lots of studies now looking at various different diseases and looking at how old somebody is biologically compared to chronologically. And yes, people with cardiovascular disease through inactivity, yes, they're older biologically. Yeah, very good question. But interestingly, again, if you increase your physical activity, you can reduce your biological age. So it's not all over. So never give in. It's never too late to become physically active and get your biological age down.
Brilliant. We'll let Les ask.
Les has got his hand up. Hi, Les.
Hello, hello, hello. Nice to meet you again.
Yeah.
I'm in a bit of a quandary here. A few years ago, I went down with symptoms which effectively were polymyalgia.
Right.
The GP has put me on to prednisolone.
Yeah.
And one of the no-nos about prednisolone is don't take statins.
Yeah.
Well, I did have some blockages in my coronary arteries at one,
Right.
and I was on to simvastatin, I think.
Right. Right.
I've
And
got a-
I guess physical activity is going to be difficult for you, isn't it, Les?
yeah, I've still got an aging packet of simvastatins and everything else, but you
Yeah.
know, I'm on a sort of a resting dose of prednisolone at the moment.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
I might ask my GP about what you've been saying about
Yeah.
statins, and I found your talk very enlightening and
Oh,
very easy to understand,
good.
even though I've been retired now for 25 years.
Yeah. Well, see if you can have a word with your GP, and I don't know whether it
I,
is difficult. I absolutely see the quandary you're in, Les. But certainly if you can try, and I always say to people, it's not going out running marathons, even just doing some
yes,
resistance exercise with bands, anything that gets your muscles
yes.
moving will help.
I mean, I see, I get osteoarthritis, particularly in my knees and
Yeah.
well, good old not aspirin, but paracetamol.
Yeah.
Eat that into it. But I must ask my GP about it.
Yeah, do see if you can have a chat with him. It may be that there's nothing you can do and that, you've got to stay on the prednisolone, but see what he thinks or she
Well,
thinks.
very,
Thanks, Les.
very nice to see you again. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
We'll try and get a few more questions in, but I'm afraid we're running out of time, so we'll see what we can do. Colin asked, does 1,3,16 beta glucans taken regularly help maintain the innate immune system? And don't if you don't know.
Yeah,
please
to be
just say you
honest,
can't-
yeah, to be honest, I'd have to look that up. I'm not aware of any work in that area. I know it's certainly good for joints, very good evidence there, but I'm not aware of anything that's looked directly at immune cells. But I could be wrong on that one. I could be wrong, but I'm not aware.
Ian asks, can you say a few words about fisetin and its senolytic action?
Oh, right. Okay. So I haven't talked much about this. So those senescent cells I told you about that are really bad news, they're pro-inflammatory. We think they're a major cause of aging. One of the ways that you can get rid of them is with chemicals called senolytics, which literally means that the things that kill the senescent cell. And there are powerful chemicals that are used to treat leukemia that can do this, but there's also things like fisetin, which is found in nutrients. If I remember rightly, I think it's berries again that fisetin is found in. So you can certainly, you can buy it online. And that's a senolytic. And again, there are trials ongoing now to see if taking senolytics, not every day, but just the studies I'm aware of, just take it for about 3 to 5 days each month, and then you rest for the rest of it. And certainly in mice, it's able to reduce a lot of age-related diseases. So yeah, it's looking interesting is fisetin, and there's lots of studies going on at the moment in humans to see if it really will help to reduce age-related diseases.
Brilliant. I'm afraid I think we're going to have to end it there. It may well be that, Janet, that you could answer some of these questions or keep hold of these questions and you can answer them at a later date. I don't know if we've really taken up a lot of your time and we're really grateful for that. It's been like an amazing talk and it's great to have so many questions and so much interest. I think just to close out, I just want to, apart from thanking you, I'd also like to thank everyone for attending, and I've hoped you enjoyed it as much as I have. And please, tell all your friends and family about this, and tell them how good it is, and come along to the next one, which, as we said, is on the 5th of November. Steve Harridge talking about exercise, and if you have liked it, feel free and please post about it on social media. Follow our Facebook tag that's up in the corner here. And also, and hope you can make it next time. And oh yeah, and look at our web page, and you'll find a little bit more about what the BSRA is doing. I think that's all I need to say. I think we are trying as as an organization through various different approaches, trying to keep people healthier and happier for longer. And hopefully this has helped a little bit. And please keep contacting us. If you want to email us, you can email us at info@bsra.org.uk if you have any more further questions. And I think I'll end it there. So I think you'd like to join me in thanking Janet again. Thank you very much, Janet.
Bye.
Brilliant. Thanks, everybody. Okay. Bye.